Hello. Hello, both of you. Welcome everyone here, live or afterwards, to the inaugural episode of Post Tech Radio. Haven't yet figured out if this is a leftist show about tech or a tech show about leftism. All I know is that Elon Musk is not my daddy. He may be your daddy. Can't make that decision for you. I am your host with the lisp heard around the world, Ada Powers. I am here with my buddies Jordan Green, who's the president of Story 2 Designs, a worker-owned cooperative and digital design agency, and my dear friend and collaborator, Zen Lara, who's a local Atlanta community organizer, queer UXer, product designer, and radical systems thinker. And we're here today to talk about tech, worker-owned agencies, collective work in tech. Yeah. What is both of your relationship to that, Jordan, besides being involved with Story 2 Designs?
Actually, I don't know. I think there have been a lot. I think for me, I've mostly been involved with tech, in a formalized sense, in tech collaboratives that have mostly been partnerships, or as a sole proprietor.
Like you and a person form like a two-person agency or something?
Yeah. Right, or a two-person partnership on one-off projects. And then I think I come from a background of being like a community organizer and being a conference organizer. And so if we talk about technology in the sense of how humans interact with the material world, we really have done a lot in terms of tech. I've done a lot in terms of tech and human collaboration and collective work. But if we talk about technology in the terms of things that are iterations on a counting machine, I've only done that work in terms of working as a designer formally as part of Story 2 Design.
That was a personal galaxy brain moment for me. I'd been in tech in the accounting machine sense, in your words, for a big chunk of my life, but I'd also been doing community organizing and stuff on the side, and it felt like two great tastes that taste great together. And I didn't really ever think I can be working in tech, going the human computer interaction route, trying to find the human side of tech. And then we're I'm like a writer and a community organizer all of a sudden. I could be doing this in and around tech, and that also counts as tech organization. And a question there in a moment, but then what's your experience with this whole fun ball of wax?
Yeah, so I've been working in tech as a product designer, UX designer, just general designer, maker of things for 12 years now. And for most of the beginning of the career, it was don't get found out. I'm getting paid money to do things that don't physically hurt my body. I was so used to manual labor and all these other things that I was just I don't have any calluses from today's work. They're paying me money. They're gonna eventually the jig is gonna be up. So I was always relating to tech as this short con, the bubble's gonna burst at any second. And then my career kept there are more doors opening. And eventually, instead of hiding, I was dang, I really need to use my voice within this sector, because everyone in tech is so optimistic about tech's ability to fix the world. And going to Silicon Valley and being in the milieu of what is the app that's going to fix global warming or that's going to cure racism, this is the way that people think.
Homeless people just don't have the right app yet.
Yeah, if we get all of the homeless on a cheap smartphone, and then
they can buy Bitcoin with it. They can trade GameStop.
Yes, the blockchain ledger, so that we can track all the homeless. That won't be bad at all. But yeah, working in tech felt like a huge privilege, and over time, I started a collective of folks interested in getting into tech. There were queer folks who wanted to work in tech because I saw, oh wow, this industry pays you money. You even get to have healthcare, and they treat you somewhat humanely. And they don't care if you have a high school diploma or a college degree. If you have a portfolio, if you can show your mettle, if you have the ability to build, if you have the ability to like learn, you can make a career and like get out of survival mode. So I was like, I must invite you into the world of working in tech, all of my queer brethren. And over time, that turned into, oh no, I don't want to like have my people train up and then go into a machine that's going to make them feel that sense of like, I'm honored to be here and I don't deserve to be here. So over the last like really 3 years, my relationship to tech and it's the what tech does as a force that has the power to make exponential any of the beliefs that occur to it. I've really wanted to see values, those values that I love in my community and like the people that I've done community organizing with, and just the people that I've watched like overcome impossible odds to create, even when it wasn't, where it seemed like a use of energy that should have been gone towards survival. Like I know so many cultural workers who like have very little stability in ways of like resources, but are constantly creating and constantly adding all this stuff. So I'm like, I want that energy and those voices to have the power of like exponential um, expansion that tech provides. And I want someone to hold tech accountable. Like, so that's how I'm relating to all this.
I'm seeing this knitting together of like, you're in tech yourself and you're having your own personal experience with it. You're dealing with other people in tech. And then you're like, well, this thing should be a trellis of growing vines, but instead it's a rocket ship. And so I want to at least get as many people that I care about on the rocket ship as possible. And then it's like, all right, now we're all suffering at individual companies. If we got together, we would only not be, we'd be suffering together, but we also wouldn't be suffering, not nearly the same way, and more so than we're all suffering under capitalism. Has that been your experience, Jordan? What is the genesis of Story 2 Designs? The folks that you're currently
that's exactly. I think that's exactly the genesis of Story 2. It was actually started by 5 individuals. I was not one of those individuals, but it was started by 5 individuals who had been working in other industries. There was 2 people who had worked in a design shop, and they just saw their labor getting exploited, just 100% exploited. And they knew that they could, if they pooled their resources with other folks, that they could really start working to the, I think with cooperative, we have a saying that the cooperative exists for the benefit of its members, right? And so like already there's a fundamental shift away from a company existing to like garner capital for its shareholders, and really start talking about its employees or its member, whoever is considered a member, because there's some weird forms of cooperatives happening, and we're happening in tech where it's like user-owned cooperatives, which I think is interesting, but really, really,
this is a direct shareholder situation.
Yeah, it's a direct shareholder situation. It's reframing that, but like a worker-owned cooperative, like especially for me, like what attracted me to Story 2 and to worker-owned cooperatives in general is just like as a Black person who comes from Black people in the United States, the idea of owning my labor is like directly antithetical to like me as a like the generational and racial legacy that I live in the United States, right? So for me as a Black person, to own my labor is a form of reparations in a country that refuses to give me my people reparations. Right?
Wow, I'm just gonna sit with that. That's really special.
Yeah. So, I think the people who started it were also folks of color, um, and also women and queer folks, in Cooper, who is neither one of those
And
things.
Cooper.
And
And
Cooper.
Cooper, who's our creative director now, and also has like been like I like to say he's like one of my and I don't like to give him kudos often, but he's like one of my favorite white dudes because he like white straight dudes because he's like super down for the cause and has always been and has been one of the people that um, has been driving towards solidarity with like folks of the working class and folks of like different backgrounds and really seeing how class is a thing that connects us.
And when folks say
And
allies, accomplices, not allies, that's what they mean.
yeah, like in the true sense of the word, Cooper is an accomplice, and I really appreciate him for it. Um, but yeah, him, Roxanne, and a couple of other folks, Gabe, started Story to Design, and they started it as a way of like, really, they were young, plucky folks out of college that were like, let's start a worker-owned cooperative, and like let's live our sort of radical. I mean, because we're in Seattle, it's kind of hard to not be radical in Seattle. It's kind of hard not to be like in on the West
Right.
Coast in general.
It's just in the air.
It really, I mean, it really is like you're talking about sort of sites of protest and sites of power that have existed at least within the last two generations, and so you sort of have this undercurrent of like leftist thinking in the first place, and like what is it like to be in collective and community with each other. It doesn't always get executed well, but that is an undercurrent, and so like it was something in the air there that like really helped them foment this idea of a worker-owned cooperative.
Yeah.
And they're evergreen graduates as well, so like again, sort of like radical leftist galaxy brain sort of type thinking.
There's sort of this like imagine like an ambient epistemic facilitation. Like if you
Yeah,
live in a city where this doesn't seem possible, you're not going to think of it. When it seems like it could be possible, whether or not it's more possible there than anywhere else, you're going to be
yeah,
thinking about it.
yeah, exactly. And excuse me, I think that we had already seen, like, one of my local grocery stores is a cooperative. And you just see that word and, like, kind of to your point, right? The exposure, like when you're exposed to things and different people showing you different possibilities, it allows for you to think about, well, what does this possibility look like in my own life? Is it a probability at that point? And so they started Story to Design as a way to own their own labor. And then they invited me and my coworker Jasmine to join them about 3 years in, and we've been together. We've all been together there for about 5 years. Roxanne just left. We just hired on a new. Roxanne was filling the role of a project manager, and we just hired on our new project manager, Cece. And so, and when we were doing we sort of spearheaded the hiring process. When I spearheaded that, I was very intentional about putting the call out for not only like Black people, disabled people, but also like there are different identity vectors that are being oppressed. So like people over the age of 45 in tech is like unheard of, especially once you get out of a certain point. And so like we were very intentional about having people like not only inviting sort of young folks, but also our elders, or elders to me, right? Like
Yeah.
other people are probably their contemporaries, but my elders and like learning from that as well. So inviting all those folks to the table and creating a space where all of us are participating. That's really what our cooperative is about. Is like creating. I mean, and it's messy work, right? It's not like
Sure.
super.
I wouldn't
It's not
trust it
like
if it wasn't.
right,
Yeah.
but like we're in the process of building a place where we all can not only just own our labor, but pool our collective labor together to produce really wonderful experiences and we focus specifically on like social justice, social good
Yeah.
organizations that are value aligned with us. Right.
I mean, that's
And
the
so,
difference between literally between like a bunch of freelancers as an agency, right? I can't just say I'm a project manager and like just sit there waiting to get hired as a project manager for like my one client that I'm working directly for, unless I'm like in the project management biz. But you get to specialize, you get to like wear different hats.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we're still kind of figuring out. I mean, we've been around for 5 years, and like for a new business, for any like that really goes to talk about the need and also the staying power for Story 2. Like being around for 5 years as a new business is a really big feat, and so we're kind of like at this place now of like, what does the next 5 years look like?
Right.
We To some people it's like, haha, that's laughable, but like if you think about where Facebook was 10 years ago, if you think about where like a lot of these tech companies that like TikTok, for instance, right, or Byte, a lot can happen in 5 years. And so thinking about like how like what do the next 5 years for Story 2 look like? What does the next 5 years look like as we're building out this agency that serves the people that we want to serve, tell their stories in a way that engages people, and leverages our expertise to make the world a better place. Like that gets a little bit messy because a year ago none of us would have even thought about a global wide like flu pandemic that traps us in our local, like traps us really in our local communities, and like we even like last year, it was impossible to think about what was happening with GameStop right now, and sort of like what is getting exposed and how it's getting exposed and how that's changing the ways that we interact with each other. So yeah, we're really in a place where we're looking at the long term of, of the organization and how do we invite people to be part of us in this oasis of like be an oasis in this like really sometimes really horrible tech scene, and like not in a bad way, just like the hiring process for me was really interesting because the folks that were attracted to our organization really came being sort of burnt out from bigger companies, and sort of like to Zen's point earlier, like having these like horrible experiences as these like solo practitioners and really wanting to find a place where they were held and seen and really kind of taken care of a bit better, is like what we're doing right now. Story, that's like my job at Story 2 is designing an organization to take care of that.
To your, I think your success also speaks something to the market, right? Like the same way that I guess like fair trade has become trendy. I don't know what the future of like support collective agencies looks like, but clearly there are folks right now, probably as you said, mostly other social justice oriented clients who like really want to support. Like I know here at Not Safe, we want to start offering stickers, and so like finding a shop that does union labor is like pretty important, right? Like whatever wherever your politics align with business and you have a business need, you're going to want to find people to work with. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see, and maybe you can speak more to this in a moment, of like how if your client mix has shifted. Also going back to something you said a little bit ago, like kind of the core of what you said, like this is for the benefit of the employees. It really strikes me that like every company says they're for the benefit of the employees, and every company probably to some extent may try to have their heart in the right place, but at some point in time, those are two different needs, and one of those needs is going to be more important. And
yeah, I think
moving to a worker-owned model is really the only way to like flip it to like the business needs are the worker needs. They're inseparable because they're the same.
Yeah,
because it's worker-owned.
Yeah, I mean, to your point earlier, and I want to make space for them to talk as well, but like I've been sort of noodling on this a little bit. Like your business is your politics, and your politics is your business. Like how you spend your time. Like you wake up, like in our capitalist society, you wake up, you go to work for, if you're lucky, for 8 hours a day. If you're not so lucky, even more than that. And if you're really lucky, less than that, right? But you spend a significant amount of your waking hours, um, like doing labor, in this society, and how you spend your labor is like what you do every day is your politics in action, right? And so like thinking about like thinking about that in those terms, and not to be like on some radical tip, just in a like, you know, on even on mindfulness tip, like when you're thinking about your practice, when you're thinking about what you practice every day, are you practicing the kind of world that you want to live in? Are you practicing the kind of world that you want, not your children, but maybe your friends' children, or like people that you care about, or even your elders to live in? Like that's the question. Like, not to be like big and philosophical, but that's kind of the question that's always constantly playing out in the background of my brain. And so when you think about that, right, when you go to work, it's not like, I think a lot of people like to separate, well, I'm going to just separate like my electoral politics or my policy politics from the kind of work that I do. And like, we're living in a time right now where it's clear that that is no longer an option for a growing majority of people. And so the kind of like, but I think that in the United States, we kind of frame like political action as this like one and done thing. We kind of frame it in terms of like an either or. And what I really like about being at Story Two and like working at Story Two is like, what if you're creating an institution that takes care of people? What if what if your radical politics is creating a space for other possibilities to emerge? And it's not necessarily like, you know, you can, I think there's like a lot of folks who like have like a socialist bent or a capitalist bent or whatever, what have you. But really, like, I'm not trying to think about economic policy in terms of that sort of framing. I'm more thinking about like your everyday life. How do you wake up? How do you go to work? How do you show up for people that you're working with? And like, what? How is their labor being valued in relation to your labor? And thinking about those things is really, really important, I think, for the future of work and the future of our economy. Because like, as we're seeing, like, our economy is not, it's not kind of like what we, like, a lot of people think these things are immutable, right? I've been really inspired. I think it's maybe because it's Aquarius season, so I've been really thinking about Ursula Le Guin and like Angela Davis, right? And like, Ursula Le Guin has this, Kay Le Guin has this quote. She's also a Portlander, so like, as someone who went to school in Portland, like, I'm just like, you know, West Coast Aquarius people. Like, that's what I've been thinking about a lot. Um, she has this quote that is like, you know, and I'm going to mangle it, but it's like, capitalism seems inevitable, but like 1,000 years ago, the divine right of kings seemed inevitable, right? So there's always this like way in which like the systems that we think are like infallible or um, immovable are just movable systems. And so that's, I think, being part of a worker-owned cooperative is a way of me trying to like move those systems and create, at least create space for possibility to exist for something else to emerge out of that, right? While also like maintaining the fact that like in a worker-owned cooperative, right? I should be clear about that. But also like maintaining the fact that like we have to survive in capitalism,
Right.
and there's a different way between like joining a company that gives you benefits and just being a sole proprietorship. Like, there are other ways of existing.
Or the
Instead
thought of
of
like,
just
I'll
being
work really
sold.
hard my whole life, make a bunch of coin, and then like turn to philanthropy. Like, you can be
Yeah,
doing this on a micro. I wouldn't even say the thing you said earlier is like heady and philosophical. It's so simple, it's almost tautological. It's like the stuff you do is the stuff you do. Like, what are you
yeah,
doing? That's what you're doing. You can't say you're doing one thing, think you're doing one thing. Look at what you're actually doing, and what are you doing?
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think it's hard for Americans to do that, right? Like, I think it's hard for, like, we live in a society, like, even now, like, we can't even talk
are you saying we
to
live
each
in a
other.
society?
No, no, no. I was gonna say we live in a society. Um, Even now, like, let's talk about COVID, and like, let's talk about like how we're not talking about how like just the amount of grief that exists in the United States, and how we're just sort of like working through it. Like, we're just working through it, and that we're not taking care of each other in the ways that we could be.
And how it feels
We
like a massive gold mine if you find an employer who like acknowledges that your output might be 15% lower than typical. instead of like, I can't come to work today. There was a coup on the government, and I am very sad in ways I can't describe because they're not happening to me, but they're also happening extremely to me. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really grateful for a space like Story 2. I feel really honored that they trust me to be the president. Like that's a huge different. That's a different role, stepping out of my role as a UX designer and really stepping into this role of like doing business development and like representing the organization and also helping shape the next however long I'm president for. We're still figuring that out, but like that's huge. So I'm really happy to be part of that.
5 more years. I will. I want to dig more into the mechanics of Story 2, but first, Zen, your thoughts on everything.
Everything.
I'm sorry, and there's stuff going on in my house, so the workers just left, so I'm gonna, or my apartment, I should say. They just fixed the light, so I'm gonna go off camera for just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, so much of what Jordan was talking about resonates really hard around sort of, I think about the environment in which I'm doing my life's work, doing the things that I do. As the environment is continuously changing, like the exchange rate of my aliveness. So if I'm in a space where
one spoon really doesn't buy what it used to.
No, the spoon inflation. The spoon inflation during COVID has been wild, and no one's talking about the spoon inflation. Yeah, and the idea of like having a worker-owned cooperative and saying we exist for the benefit of the workers, it doesn't require a sort of gesture of good faith to believe that, because the way that you hold your identity as a collective, your meta identity, is us, instead of like us mediated through an HR department or us mediated through what is in vogue to present about your diverse, inclusive culture to the outside realm. Like there's
abstraction reifying my labor today.
Yeah, it gets to be, you don't only invest when you are the workers and you are responding to your own needs. You don't only respond to the things that make a really good press release about like, oh, we now have this benefit, or we now allow dogs in the office. Like those sorts of things that are easy photo ops that are really, really alluring, because it's like, oh, you mean we get to step out of some form of like feudalistic, not getting to have any sort of desires whatsoever?
But it's actually extra feudalistic. It's like,
it is.
Sociologists call it a total institution, right? Like the military. Like we will take care of all your needs. You also live with us, and you're also at our disposal constantly. I think of it more as like a Dyson sphere around human labor.
Yes.
Like, let's just give you dry cleaning and childcare and put you in an apartment that is labeled with our company.
Oh, and, you don't already have a puppy? Here's your puppy. We've issued you a puppy. It's an emotional support puppy.
It's the only dog allowed in the office. You're allowed to play with it at your desk only.
Yeah, there is that sort of sense of the authenticity of what does we mean where you're doing your labor. Does we mean like actually me as a human and all of what I am? Or is it me as a producer of like a deliverable? Is it me as like, well, what do you need to be effective in this context? Like, what is my well-being as it relates to the collective? So yeah, there's something there about like being able to exist in a spiritual alignment to your own needs as an individual, as like a being, and having that be at the forefront, and not having all of these different levels of institution between you and getting to express those needs and starting to strategize about how to meet those needs, and having like those needs being prioritized. Yeah, like not having to trust that, oh, I really hope they hire someone for the HR department who's going to allow us to have employee resource groups. Like that level of, yeah, the expectations of being held just going up that much higher to actually starting to address our actual needs is like the promise of collective. And that's part of why it's so hard, because it's so like such an absurd notion to have needs that are cared about and potentially even strategized towards, that aren't just, you know, an external deliverable that someone else can benefit from.
So
Yeah.
we go ahead and respond to that, please.
Oh yeah. I also like, as someone who's in the trenches, I also want to just be honest about the hard, like there's a flip side to that, because I think a lot of people sort of like fall in love with this idea of being taken care of in an organization, or like this sort of like balancing needs is hard, right? And like every time you add a new person or a new variable, you add complexity. And so like one of the things that I really like, as someone who sort of like grew up in these places where we talked a lot about collectivism, and we talked a lot about having your needs met by the collective, is like we're still approaching it from a very like individualistic mindset, right? And like there are people, like I want to be acknowledging, like there are folks whose ancestors and like direct ancestors, like Lolo and Popo, come from collectivist, like communist countries, right? And like that is not something that seems appealing, because like the needs of the many, like to be all Star Trekky about it, the needs of the many really did outweigh the needs of the few, right? And so like the like while I like sort of like on a daily practical basis, like as a small company, we get to have like these lines of communication where like the members' needs are addressed, right? But like I also want to be mindful, like as you grow larger and look at things like Mondragon or other places which are the biggest cooperative in the world, and it's like it's huge actually. In Spain, like there becomes a little bit more tension. Like you end up seeing a lot of like democratic models replicated, where you have representatives of people like going to bargain, right? Collective bargaining. And like those need, like as we're thinking about scaling up, if you think about scaling up, like those needs also need to be addressed, right? Because your individual needs may morph when talking to a group, right? Like so your individual need may be like, I need to rest. And then you hear the need from like your other members is like, we also need to rest, but not at the same time that you need to rest, right? And so like finding that balance is like also really important. Like finding how you can support someone who has like different neurodivergent needs than you, right? Where some may line up and some may not. Like those are like, that is the beautiful, wonderful, messy struggle of being part of a collective. And it becomes even like a lot of like, I also want to acknowledge why some people may be turned off by that, right? Because it's like sometimes you just want to go to work, show up, punch a card, leave, and like not think about
I don't want to
that
be in
work.
relation.
Yeah, and like people,
Yeah.
or if you are in relation, the relation that you're in is clearly defined because it's been iterated over time through capitalism, that it feels comfortable, safe, and familiar, right? And
Right,
so like when people show up to a company and they're like, that's the boss says this, and like we all do what the boss says. And when you show up to a place where it's like, we're all the bosses, because we're
right,
all worker owners, and we get to direct policy and procedure and like iterate on that together, and we're
right,
asking you to create with us. Like I have seen people just be like, no, absolutely not. Like I really want that kind of freedom, and like I do not have the bandwidth to deal with that as I'm dealing with COVID, and
right,
also as I'm dealing with like, I'm watching Black people get murdered every day on
right.
the internet, Like I just want to show up in a place where I don't have to think about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is also a real thing. And so like you have to balance, you have to
Yeah.
for me, like as a dreamer, I want to create a world, like I want to get to a Star Trek future. And so I'm
Right.
working toward a Star Trek future. But some people just want to show up, whether it's the
Yeah.
Federation or the Rebels or like, you know, whoever it is, like the
Yeah.
Federation, the Maquis, or like the Cardassians, they don't care because like at the end of the day, everyone needs a janitor and they you can just be a janitor and like move on, you know? So
To your point earlier about creating new reality is like, yeah, like we're all built differently. Like I'm the kind of person who I could emotionally process for a good chunk of the day, but I show up to one of those like supposedly hammered out structures in a workplace, and I'm the neurodivergent weirdo who's like, well, why not? Oh, that's against the script. I didn't know there was a oh.
Yeah.
And so I would much rather try to reach consensus with a group of people than have to accept, I don't know, participate in structures that I barely understand, much less agree with. Before we get too further into this, I like
sorry,
this
yeah.
split. No. This is perfect. Just saying, before we get into the split between like the promise, the starry-eyed promise, and then what it looks like on the other side, I'm going to give us a quick little break here. Come back and I'm just going to pop up a video, and then we'll start talking about the mechanics of Story 2 and what we can learn from your success and tribulation. So be right back. All right, narrowly hit my shove as many potato chips into my mouth as I can in 60 seconds goal. Looks like Zen is away for a moment, but I wanted to. So you were speaking earlier about, if I could paraphrase, you can tell me how far off I am. Basically saying, yes, the ability for. I'm gonna mute Zen for a moment. I think that's where it's. Yep. Basically saying that like starry-eyed hope of assuming that being in a collective automatically means your needs as workers and as people are taken care of, and there's never going to be any tension between your business needs and your people needs. Perhaps more true from a starting foundation than a, like, let's just say Fortune 500 company, but that doesn't mean that you are devoid of tension between the humans and the labor that's being produced. You have more direct control over it, perhaps, and you can certainly have more influence in negotiating how that proceeds, but there are still tensions to resolve, and at points, you still might have a conflict between what you as a worker want and need, what you as a human want and need, and then what you as a collective want and need, and how that triangulates with what the business wants and needs, which is this extra relationship that everyone is also in addition to in relation with each other. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think, you know, earlier when I was talking about, we have a motto at Story 2 that the cooperative exists for the benefit of its members. Like that is our essential value and essential tenet of like what we talk about. And so when we talk about business needs, we always keep that in mind when it comes to conflict. But we're also a small, like, you know, I think people are like, oh, start a cooperative and things will be okay. And it's like we're also a small business. So like all of the crap that comes with running a small business, um, like down to like difficulty with documentation exists, right? And so like we're going through this point now where we just onboarded someone who has an incredible amount of experience. And it's like, why don't you all have an employee manual? And I'm just like, that's a
Good
great
point.
question.
Yeah.
Good point. Good question. Because we had been just scrapping for 5 years just to get to a point where we
Right.
could even bring on an employee, right? And so, what does it mean? Like when you in some cooperatives, like, and it really depends on the kind of cooperative, you don't get offered membership until you've been there for 6 months to a year. So what does that mean? Like what we're now defining, like what does it mean to be an employee? What does it mean to be a member? What are the benefits of membership? What are the benefits of being an employee? We're also sort of like we believe in cooperation and autonomy. So that sets us up to be somewhat similar to an agency model. So if we have someone come in who wants to be a sort of a free agent, like how do you relate to our business as a free agent versus like as an employee versus a member? Like I'm in the process of delineating those things right now, right?
Right.
And documenting all those things right now. So someone who comes after me or like someone who wants to step into that role while I'm still here has a way for us, has a way of wayfinding through that, but also so that once you document it and it's clear and it's a place that people can reference, that like I'm also a dungeon master, right? And I have a bunch of different notes of like my world as I'm building out the
You're an
world,
experience
right?
designer through and through. Zen talking to I
Through and
talk about
through,
this. Like
right?
everything is experience design if you
Everything
think
is an
about it as an experience
experience.
designer. Yeah.
Right, but I have this rule, right, that like nothing in in the world in D&D is set in stone until I tell it to a player, right? And so like a player, because it also allows for like a player to be like, okay, well this is how my character responds to it, and I am super like, that's weird, and like I'll change it or like not what I expected, and I'll change my notes, right? And so it's kind of that way with any kind of documentation, right? Surprisingly, like Dungeons and Dragons, yeah, it's kind of like it's that way with documentation too, right? You write this thing down, somebody's going to go and reference that document, and then come back and pull that back to you and say like, this is what you wrote down. Um, and then you have to look at it and be like, oh, did I actually say that like 3 years ago in this context?
I was not
That's
expecting this
genuine.
auto confrontation study.
Yeah, right. So like, you need to, and we're doing radical. Like the other thing about it is we're doing radical crap. Like we're doing radical shit, and so like we need to document those processes. So in case somebody wants to iterate on those, right? Because people are iterating on capitalism all the time and processes that happen within capitalism all the time, especially extractive capitalism.
Then I think you
And
have this
so,
meta, like, sorry, just thinking like you have this meta of like, how do you share that out the same way capitalists share these ideas? How do you share to other collectives? That's another reason
yeah,
why I'm glad you're here is like people listening. People I know, Zen, you are putting together Apapacho, which is your own like worker-owned thing. There's like I want to hopefully for here for a few minutes, like also be thinking about what the people who might be sitting here hoping to get on that like equivalent of the like cottage core dream of like, what if we all just bought houses and like lived in a house and like lived out in the woods? Like everyone wants to
Yeah.
have a worker own co-op, but like
yeah.
feet hit the ground. How?
Documentation is super
Yeah.
important. Like if I could tell you anything, documentation is super important. Revisiting that documentation and like aligning yourselves with that on a regular basis, whether that's like quarterly or yearly, and like revisiting the things that you wrote down and iterating on that is super important. Way more than telling your story, listening, and then also like always thinking about, excuse me, what is the experience of people joining who haven't been in the work for 5 years or 3 years or 2 years? Like someone showed up to your organization tomorrow and was like,
Doc.
yeah, like someone showed up to your organization tomorrow and was like, I'm joining and I'll do whatever it takes. Because like as you build, if you build it, they will come, right? And so like
Yeah.
making sure that those things are there so you can guide people through it is really helpful. And so that you have some way, like if you're a person from a traumatized background, your working memory may be a little bit weird. And so like
Right.
having a place where you like having a place where you can revisit and be like, oh right, I was smart, and this one time.
I wrote it down. I
Yeah,
have like I have shared so many Notion templates of like dashboards that are just aligning on goals, aligning on what the structure of a deliverable is. And when I put together, shared that out to some folks who are starting to put together like a freelancer cooperative, they do not dare call themselves an agency or a studio yet. And found out about a productized solution called Wethos, which
tell me
basically
more
what
about
they've,
Ethos.
huh?
Tell me more because I want to hear about it.
So, okay, I'm gonna, is there a chat I can boop?
Oh, I looked at Wethos a long time ago.
But they released their first few features just probably this year because I know I was sitting in pandemic times.
Yeah.
And so much of what they do is just like show you what a contract might look like you contract Legos for small creative agencies. And that does so much to just give you a sense of what is possible and what the industry standard is so that you know what the rules are so you can remix on that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that sort of that as an actionable thing when you're learning what came up in your own cooperative, essentially in your like relationships with the people that you're building with. The things that come up, they might come up for other people. They might not. But getting to remix on what other people have already put into practice saves you so much time. Um, and yeah, it helps get closer to what it is that your values are and seeing the difference between what other people value. These are all the things that they put in their contracts. This is the stuff that we feel like we need in addition to that. um, yeah.
Or subtracting from. Like
Yes.
the goal of contracts is like in all documentation it's twofold, right? It's like one to tell people where you're coming from, right? And to like express your ethos in a way that's very clear. And two is to protect yourself, right? Like that is the
Mhm.
point of a contract. It is a formalized boundary. And that is the role of like all of your documentation. It's a formalized boundary that people have agreed upon, right?
Mhm.
And just because that boundary is formalized doesn't mean there isn't room for negotiation, right? But I think you when you think about like sort of the structure of like the tyranny of structurelessness, and like when you start thinking about when people are like, oh, let's just like go with vibes, man, like those sort of things, like
As long as you document the vibes.
yeah, document the vibe, or like just know that vibes change, but documents do not, right? And like, and unless we all agree to change those,
Mhm.
um, and so it's like having a formalized structure. Because I think like I think the starry-eyed promise is like I think a lot of folks who come from like for me personally, like I was really attracted to work at cooperatives because I had been burnt by so many other forms of work, especially working in the like nonprofit industrial complex and also working in like civic organizations, right? And civic was a lot better because there were unions and things like that. But um, I just got tired of like I just got tired of certain things. And then I show up at this sort of like scrappy startup and start influencing culture and things like that. But like, as I did my own work, I realized that a lot of things that I was doing was in reaction to things that were no longer present in my environment. And
Yeah.
like
Oh crap,
in
this is a trauma response.
right, right. Has my whole career been a trauma response? Right. And like when you
Companies don't
start
hire people, they hire traumas.
yeah, no,
Where are you
seriously.
deriving your self worth from? Is it external? Great. I can exploit
Yeah,
that.
Oh no.
totally. Yeah. So I think it's really important, like as you're building, you're not building a traumatic place. You're building a place that like is going to take care of you. So like what do you need to be taken care of? Like and how do you document that? And so when your traumas show up, like and work trauma is a real thing. Like we're dealing with it at our company. we're trying to engage and move forward with it and address it collectively. But like as you deal with that, like how do you put systems in place so that you remember how to practice care, right? Because you can
Mm.
practice your traumatic behaviors as well as like you can practice your behaviors that you find traumatic, and you can find behaviors that you can practice behaviors you find caring. And so like that's what documentation is. It's like helping you document the behaviors you find caring and helping other people institute those things along the way. Yeah.
I want to. I just put up a ticker that said accounting accommodating for trauma as a business need. In our last few minutes here, I want to admit a naivete. When I asked you for your title and you said president of this org, my first response was like, oh, like it's a worker-owned co-op. I kind of assumed it'd be like workers 1 through 5, and you'd all show up like linking arms, and like that would just be each of you like say 1/5 of a sentence. Not really, but like I guess the question I'm asking is structure, right? Like going into a structure like this, it's a worker-owned co-op. That doesn't mean that people don't have different administrative duties, but I think that some people who might be thinking of forming a co-op might not be thinking about the need of like, we're not just all individual contributors and also managers and also directors. Division of labor. Do you find that your division of labor model is like, I'm not going to say objectively best, but like how does that work for you? What advantages do you think you might have or disadvantages compared to like everyone having the exact same share of the responsibility pie?
Oh my gosh, Jordan, I love your expression right now.
Well, it's just like, you know, we weren't clear on it for a while, and we're starting to get clear on it now, right? And so, like, I was just elected president, and when I was elected, it was a ceremonial title. And then when we brought someone else on, like again, when you add a member, you add complexity. And so when we brought on this new person, she was like, "You're the president. I need for you to know these things." And like that changed the game, right? Like we like in a lot of ways CC with her experience is getting us together. And so like but like if I need to know these things, like that changes the dynamic of the district, like what our labor is doing. And like we're figuring that stuff out. And I think like, you know, I really started looking at other worker owned cooperatives because you do need someone that's helping you hold the vision, but also like is the interface. So like when opportunities like this come up that are strategic for us, like that is my job to go do that thing, right? And that is a form of labor that I like it's a job, right? Like it's work, right? And that work needs to be recognized in the same way that like a lot of times women in femmes work gets invisibilized and it gets put in the role of like project manager instead of like IC, right? Or in a lot of ways in which like you know, operate like an operations coordinator or your equity person is a black woman or like a woman of color, but like not necessarily leading the charge of the organization. Like those like when you start looking and parsing out labor, you want to be able to define those roles as clearly as possible, and have people opt into it. And we're doing that right now because I think when people hear no bosses, they're like, oh yay, like, but like at a certain point, like you do need someone to be a decision maker, and they do need to
Yeah,
be empowered organizationally to be that kind of decision maker. And the
yeah,
kind of decisions that they're making need to be clear, right? Like, so is this person making a decision about the product going out the door, or is this person making a decision about the strategic vision? Is that person the same person? If so, how can you
yeah.
recognize that kind of labor that they're doing and how exhausting that is? Like all of those things are around boundaries and making sure that people don't burn
Yeah.
out. And if you
I'm
don't
drawing.
have
Go ahead.
you know, and if you don't have clarity around that, um, you will burn out. Like you will, like, cause you'll like, I don't know, like so many people who are from traumatic backgrounds are used to carrying the weight of everything, right? And like doing like especially if you come from nonprofits or like you're constantly trying to prove your worth. Like we like people in minority in marginalized positions are used to doing. You take on everything, And so like having a boundary to hold yourself accountable by saying like, look, this is your role. This is your position.
And it's better to
Right.
design an org structure that allows people to swap in and out of leadership roles rather than asking everyone to be 1/5 president, 4/5 IC at any given time.
Yeah.
I'm drawing a comparison in my head. I'll out myself as polyamorous. No big. I do it all the time. Of like descriptive versus prescriptive hierarchy, right? Like
Yeah.
being egalitarian in your non-monogamy does not mean not having nesting partners, not having anyone that you spend more time with than others. It doesn't mean parsing everything out equally. It means being really clear around like this is what our relationship means to me, to us, and how we communicate it to the world. If we're living together or what have you, doesn't mean you automatically get a say in my relationships, even though I still am entangled with you in a way that looks hierarchical in some way. It's not prescriptive. Like you're not in a particular position of power. You're being, Jordan as president, you're being empowered to do certain things and not do certain other things. And there's still structures to challenge that and work with that. You don't get to just decide to become a despot, become a boss at any given time.
Yeah, because I'm not anybody's boss. But I am like helping direct the organization and like doing things a servant leader would do. And I want to be clear about that. And I need other people to see what that is and help hold me accountable to that.
Yeah, I like the way that that's articulated. Like it's functional power versus symbolic power. So people are still accountable to you to like raise issues because it is like this is a function and everyone's input is an important part of that function being carried out rather than I have this authority, this like symbolic power which lessens other people's voices.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, as we think about, I mean, I know we're running short on time, but I think one of the really important takeaways to think about is like, how do I put this? Like, we're going to have to figure out what power looks like differently, and we're going to have to do that in a way, or like some of us are going to have to do that in a way where we haven't been exposed to different power models. And all we know is like what we don't want and not what we want. And that is the hard work, right? It's like, how do you do something that is based on an indigenous model if you've never worked with indigenous people, but like that is an alternative to this extractive capitalistic model, right? And it's like you're gonna have to skill up in those things and just know that like in the background you always like, because you've been exposed to this model over and over and over and over again, you're going to fall back and default to models that are oppressive. Like everybody's going to do that, and not like like we live in a society that values and incentivizes that model and those roles. And so what you need to do, like as a leader, like this is what I do, is like I like have a therapist, a mindful eating coach, like some like I actively ask people to hold me accountable. Like I am working constantly to be in relations with people and transform the nature of that power dynamic, because that power dynamic, if you don't actively walk the other way on the moving sidewalk, you'll move toward that power dynamic of like being a totalitarian boss. So you must actively be walking against it.
This is the worst travelator ever.
I think we gotta wrap up here. This is friggin' fascinating. I might want to have both of you on to continue this discussion, maybe with other co-op agencies as we continue. Want to talk to you about the one in Spain that you mentioned. Real quick, I want to give a shout out to our network. We're at Not Safe for Wonks, youtube.com/notsafemedia, and SFW Wonks on Twitter, and patreon.com/notsafe. There's a media network that has made this possible. They're a rad group of leftist content creators, and you can get involved and support them in all of these ways. And then here in our world, we have Jordan, Twitter at Jordannaut, web story2designs.com, and throw Jordan some cash, kofi.com/Jordannaut, JORDONAUT. And then on Zen side, we have zenlara.com, cutiejack.com, the Queer Transformative Justice Atlanta Collective, Twitter at Tobamese, TOBAMESE, and Cash App, Zen Lara, ZENLARA. Quick, like, 15-second plugs for your things that you want to draw more attention to. Jordan, I know you mentioned something.
Oh, well, yeah. Natasha Marin, who was our anti-racist facilitator and responsible for us moving to our next level, seriously, she is doing something called Sites of Power. Follow her work, Natasha, Natasha, Marin, Marin. She does story-based strategies for dismantling racism. She's she's she is responsible for reparations.me. She's doing incredible work around Black joy, and I just want to uplift her work every chance that I get.
Awesome, thank you. Zen, how about you?
Nothing comes. No. Well, Queer Tech is going to be having our new members meeting. Queer.tech. Yeah, which right now I think the site is down, so visit it later. But we'll be having our new members meeting in February, and yeah, we talk about this sort of thing. And
cool.
Yeah.
Well, if you're already here on YouTube watching this, or if you're on any platform that is not like my personal page, but is attached to the Not Safe Media page, right now we have going live Ungirl, which is part of the weekly Not Safe for Walk stream with Rachel Kahn and guests. Go ahead and refresh the page after this ends and check it out. Hop on over there. Thank you both so much for coming on and chatting. This has been really nourishing and exciting. And I need to lovingly extract more information from both of you over the future about how to build a much better work-life world. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Bye.